Hello and welcome to the Blue Tweezers channel. This is Alf Allen from the channel as usual, and something I wanted to do for this game, a few initial thoughts. This is Seas of Thunder, Global Naval Warfare, 1939 to 45 by GMT Games. Game designed by Jeff Horger, Charles Maher and Neil Cebulski. Hope I get those right. Yes, good to see you all. Sorry it's been a bit lean on the channel recently. But I just got this game on P500 and wanted to just share my thoughts on it. See what your thoughts were if you've been playing it, and let's get into it. So I've just finished playing Scenario 1. This is the end of Scenario 1, which is the first 3 turns of the game. I think there are 25 turns in the entire game. If you played sort of a campaign which you run scenario to scenario, or even just carry on from one game turn to the next. We are, turn 3 just finished, and I must admit, scenario 1 doesn't seem to be much of a fair fight. The UK and the French versus the Germans only is it's a bit tough on the Axis side, but enough to get a few ideas of the game on this. If anybody in the chat could let us know that you can hear me and see the board, that would be appreciated. Anyway, so I just got this game from P500, and the game's loosely based on the old Avalon Hill War at Sea, Victory in the Pacific games, which were based in the Atlantic and in the Pacific. This is the entire world, and it's rated complexity 4, which I think 4 out of 10, which I think is about right. And the game mechanics are pretty simple for most GMT games here. It's a lot simpler than other naval games such as Atlantic Chase that they do. So we've got the board here, just on from here onwards, down here. And as you can see, it's the world, but it's the world, and I'll take my dice tray off. It's a world which is ever so slightly wonky, shall we say. Now, I understand that this has caused some controversy. I just expanded it to the side here so you can see. Adjustment here. So you can see Canada and the US appear on the edge of the board. So yeah, we've got continents which are a little bit ragged and wobbly. I think this has got some criticism. However, having played the game, it really needs to be this way. There's not a lot of room in these sea zones, as you see, which are designated by these boundaries, these black boundary lines. You need to put the ships into the sea zones, and it can get quite crowded. So particularly for the Black Sea here, it's got 4 sea zones in it, and if it was the size of the Black Sea, then you would hardly be able to fit anything in. So it's functional. I don't mind it, actually. I think it works. It's good enough, and yeah, with the exception of that and maybe the very narrow South America here, it's fairly okay. I think it's fairly okay. Hi Michael, good to see you. Thanks. Let us know the audio works. Thank you. Let us know if you've got the game. Anybody out there, let us know if you've got the game, tried it out, see what you think as well. Just put it in the chat. Anyway, let's just go through some of the components. So we've got the counters here, which I'll try and zoom into. Does that work? Not quite. Hang on a minute. Come on. Zoom in. It'll get that, yeah. It's just about there. Yeah, so that's a CV. Aircraft carrier, of course. Come on, zoom in, yeah. It really doesn't want to zoom, does it? Let's try with this hand. That might help. trying to cover. Come on, there's nothing else for you to see there. Nope, it really doesn't want to move. Okay, so we've got this, a CV there. It's got the name, which is the Ark Royal, which is slightly blurred out. And it's got 4 numbers there, although generally they have 3 numbers. The first 2 numbers together, they're known as a gunnery factor and a specialisation factor. Then you've got survivability, and then you've got range. So that's a 2, 8, 4, 4. I think that's no, it's a 6. Sorry, even I can't see it properly. So pretty much it means, you know, attack, defense, movement, really. And the specialisation is, if we look on the counter, and again, I might not be able to see it because my camera just doesn't want to behave. It's got the symbols here for air. It's got the word air on it. So that area is where it tells you what a specialisation is, and the number in brackets next to the gunnery factor is how good it is in that. And we're talking about, you know, dice rolls here on number of dice to roll here on the gunnery factor. There is also, as you saw there was a yellow stripe. The stripes on counters actually denote which scenario they're in, so they don't really have any game effect other than setup. And finally, there's a number in the top right-hand corner, which is the turn of entry. Oh, one other thing, of course, they've got a back which has a flag of the nationality of the ship. We've got a lot of different types here. We've got not only aircraft carriers, but and each of the counters is a single ship down to cruiser level. So below cruisers, we've got submarines, destroyers, mine layers, minesweepers. So they are groups, I think, although the submarines may be individual. They also have a thing called an auxiliary cruiser unit, which is known as a CX. Let's see if I can find one of those around here. Go missing when you want them. Here we go. So again, I'll try and focus. So that's a CX, which is effectively known as a raider in the game. They go raiding. So in Victory in the Pacific, you had 2 sides to the ship counter, one which was a patrolling side and one which was a raiding side, and you got to go 3 sea areas as a raider and only 2 sea areas as a patroller. But a patroller counted for owning the sea area at the end of the turn, whereas a raider didn't. But raiders are separate here, the CX values, and you can have cruisers as well, doing this raiding as well, which is a type of combat. So 7 scenarios in total, at least 3 turns in each. You can link them together and play one after the other, or you can just go for the whole war, start to finish. So there's quite a lot of game here. Okay, so what's a turn like? So at the start of the turn, all the ships are in ship units are in port boxes, and that's what's over here. These are the port boxes. Now, I'll get one or the other. You get a display of port boxes for each scenario. This is scenario 1, so it's slightly off camera. I'll show you one of the others, if I can. Okay, so for example, this one here, this is the port boxes for the Axis side in scenario 4. So you can see it's quite a lot of boxes here. And these correspond to these little emblems on the map, which is where the port boxes are with the name matching. Now, one thing to know is that there's 2 sides to this map. This is the early war map for the early scenarios, and there's a late war map. And in each scenario, even if they are early war, they will have different port boxes available. So even though you would see a map and say, okay, there is a certain port box on the map. It may not be available for the scenario. What I've done here is with these little red counters and blue counters, there's no difference in the colour, is to denote the neutral ports that the Axis have access to on their port box display. But there are lots of others, for example, a lot of Japanese port boxes on the map there which aren't available, so only ones with that. So that's the thing to just be careful of. Yeah, Michael. Yeah, if you don't own the game, that's fine. It's follow along and see what you think. If you've got any questions, just bung him in the chat. Okay, so we have the ships in the port boxes, and if we take a close look, for example, here we have the French port of Brest here. So it's French. So, and then it has two emblems for a ship and an aircraft, and which designation, nationality of ships and aircraft can stay there. So that's the Kriegsmarine, that's the German, and that's the Italian. So this scenario 4 is when France has been conquered. What's also here is the letter U, and as you can see, for places like Bergen, there's a 6 and a 4. U means unlimited, and this is the capacity of the port. This is how many ships you can actually stack in the box. As you can see, it can get a little bit crowded on some of the boxes with the unlimited, like Kiel, particularly on the Axis side, but more so on the Allied side. So everything is off the board effectively at the start of the turn, with the exception of convoys. But I'll come on to convoys in a bit. You start by receiving reinforcements or repaired ships. So when a ship is damaged, in the War at Sea and Victory in the Pacific, you had little damage markers you put on the counter, and that's a survivability factor you compare that against. And if that built up to the point where it equaled or exceeded the survivability factor, then the ship was sunk. In this game, slightly different. When you do combat against a ship and it is damaged, as in it takes damage which is not equal to or greater than its survivability factor, then it's actually taken off the board and put in these repair boxes here. And you roll a dice to see how many turns it's going to take for the ship to repair. So you actually stop the combat with it, even if you had something to attack it later on in the combat. It's immediately removed off and put in these repair, and they will then come back in as reinforcements. So reinforcements with the turn of entry number, that's the turn, and of course any returning damaged ships come back in. You place them in the port boxes. Note that, for example, for the German Navy, you have to start in Germany. So you've got Königsberg, Kiel, and Hamburg as your choices. You can't base it, say, into a neutral port, etc. The British are and the French are a lot better here because they've got a lot of bases. As you can see, you've got the Portsmouth and Scapa Flow, but you also got Freetown here, Cape Town, Aden, etc., all the way across in over in Rabaul, or Fiji, or Tonga. So you can base these reinforcements or returning ships quite all over the globe, which the Germans don't have the option of doing. After you've placed these in the port boxes, then you place your convoys. So convoys are these blue markers here. That's an Allied convoy. And this is an Axis convoy. So for this scenario, there are, I think, 30 of each. And they're placed on the board. They're actually kind of like markers. They're not units per se. They're targets. So once they're placed in an area, they'll stay there for the rest of the game unless they get attacked and sunk. Again, part of combat, I suppose. And what happens is when they're sunk, they come back next turn at the start after reinforcements, and you get to place them on the board. And what you do, for example, these are the ones that have been sunk at the end of the game here. These are the Axis ones and the Allied ones. You basically cut each stack of those in half and hand them to the two players, and then they get to place them on the board. So the Axis player places half the Axis convoys and half the Allied convoys, and then the Allied player places theirs as well. And what you're looking for, really, I suppose, particularly in this scenario, is the Axis convoys. The Axis are trying to put them in really hard to get places. There is a restriction, though, is that each of these convoys has a back on it, which tells you where they can. So that's, again, it's not deciding not to focus, but that's Indian, Pacific, East, West, or South. So these regions have got these sort of coloured borders on, so that restricts where you can put the convoy. But within those boundaries, you want to, as the Axis, you want to put your convoys into awkward places. And the Allies would like their convoys very much in the sea lanes, so they can be protected by their, frankly, massive navy. You don't want them in the obscure areas. So each player gets to do half of the convoys of each side on the map, and once that's done, we move on to the movement. So in this scenario, it was Allied ships move first, Axis move second. In later scenarios, it does sometimes vary with the nationalities in the sequence of who does it first, who does it last. But in this, it was quite simple. So you take all the Allied ships out of your port boxes and you put them on the board in the sea zones that you want to. Now, when they're coming out of the port boxes, you need to look at their range, which is their third value, which can vary massively. So there are several, sometimes little mine layers, etc., which has a range of 1. So essentially they can just move out of a port box into an adjacent sea zone. Or there's one, I think 23, so it can get most of the way around the world if necessary. So there's a wide variance, and sort of your average is kind of like the 3 or 4. Raiders tend to be the longer ranging ones, particularly the sort of the German raiders. There are and then sort of light cruisers, that kind of thing tends to have the range. And the short range stuff tends to be the little guys. You get destroyers going beyond something like 3. So you've got to manage all those ships coming out of the port boxes and forming into fleets in particular sea zones, very much like War at Sea, Victory in the Pacific. So once the Allies have done that, there's no particular stacking limit in the sea zone. It's a huge place, of course. And what you're looking for is there are VP markers on each of the sea zones. So this one here, which is the Central Atlantic, is 3 points for the Axis, 1 point for the Allied. And pretty much the board actually scores more points for the Axis than the Allied. I don't think there's an Allied one, which there's a couple which are equal, but mostly the Axis get more points. So the idea is that it's going to be mostly an Allied board, but they're not going to score many points out of it in comparison to the Axis, who won't necessarily have much of the board under their control, but they'll get quite a few points for it. So when you move your range, you count from the port box into the sea zone next to it, and then carry on there up to your range. After both sides have done their deployment, then you have land-based air, which is here. So these are air units which you can put out, which basically have a gunnery factor, although it's not gunnery per se, it's an air factor, an air specialization factor, and those can go adjacent to in the sea zone, adjacent to any of that nationality's port boxes, one in which they have the plane symbol on, like we saw before with Brest here, So the plane symbol here, so the land-based air from Germany can go from Brest, but of course not the Italians or the Japanese. And those are deployed out as well, Allied first, then Axis. And as you can see, the who goes first thing is quite critical in this game. So the Allies have to kind of guess where the Germans are going to go, which of course is where they're not going to go, because their fleet is a lot smaller. If I point out, this is pretty much all of the German fleet here in the North Sea, and as you can see, these other stacks around, there are some big stacks around of British and French fleets, which would far outmatch them. So the idea is for the Germans really to go where the Axis, where the Allies aren't, score the points for that, or maybe target of opportunity. So if there's a small stack of Allied units in the area with maybe a decent point score for control, then the Axis units can come out and try and have a battle. That seemed to be how it goes. From turn 4 onwards, you've got the Italian Navy as well, so I think it starts to even up. And then, of course, I think it's scenario 4. We start getting the Japanese and the Americans, of course, in, but the Japanese have got a lot of ships. Okay, so once everything's placed, all the land-based areas placed, you then go through the combat phase, and each of these same areas have a little number on them. So it starts at number 1, which is up in this corner, and goes all the way round, and then ends up to there, which is 121, zone 121. And you go in that order, doing any combat where there are ships from each side in. Now, when you start the combat for a particular area, and what I would advise is mark that area with something else, so that you remember where you were when you come back off the combat. You have this mat. There's 2 of them in the game, 1 for each side, which is how you deploy your ships. So you have various boxes here. Starts with air superiority, then airstrike, anti-submarine warfare, raiders, submarine attacks, mine warfare, surface line, surface reserve, and convoy attacks. And you place your forces on this display where you want them, how you want them to react. Now, beyond the surface line and surface reserve, really you need to have a special ability, a specialization on the counter of the ship. So, for example, land-based air can be in either air superiority or airstrikes. The mine layers can be, and mine sweepers can be in the mine warfare box. Raiders can go in the raider box, of course, which is the CX or the cruisers. Submarine attacks, of course, you put the submarines there. Anti-submarine warfare, you're looking for an ASW on the counter, usually the DDs, but you can put in land-based air. There's various other ones which have that ability, because you can sink submarines with mines, or aircraft, of course. So any of those. So these are deployed on each side. The surface line one has got this track here, and what you do is you line up all your surface only competence in an order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many you have, and of course the opponent does it on their display. And when you get to the surface line part of the combat, it's going to be 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, etc. Any overlap you can double up, or you can actually use your surface line to attack the surface reserve box, which doesn't get to attack. If we start with air superiority, so you compare the air values on each side, and they will cancel each other out. If there's any left over, the air superiority then goes on to cancel out air units, including carriers, so they have anything with an air ability on it. Cancel them out. Any remaining can then try and attack pretty much anything in any box, with the exception of submarines. If they attack a particular counter, and again it's counter versus counter here, you don't split counters, they will get an anti-aircraft roll, which is on this table. They get a number of rolls looking for a 1. If they do, they take one of the airstrikes off. The airstrike value is a number of dice. You roll it. If it's a raider, you need a 1. If it's anything else, then a 1 or a 2. And then for each damage, you roll a dice and you compare that with the survivability factor. And the survivability factor, if you get equal to exceed it, it's sunk the unit. If not, it's then damaged, as I said before. From airstrikes, we move on to anti-submarine warfare. So this is against any subs who are in the submarine attacks box. So this is a chance to get rid of the submarines before they get to attack. Then on the Raiders box, this isn't actually any combat here. What happens is you get a choice with the Raiders. You could go into the convoy attacks box if you wanted to just attack any convoys that are there of the opposition. Or you can just end up going into the surface line box or into the surface reserve box. There's a subtlety there about Raiders. There is that they get a look at the opposition, and you get to make a decision whether you go to the convoy attacks box, which pretty much makes you immune. Only convoys can be attacked here, and you can attack convoys. But even if there's no convoy here, if you go here, you've kind of turned tail and run. Or you can stand in line if you want to. So the Raiders get a choice, once you've seen the displays available. After submarine attacks, mine warfare, you've got mine laying units, MLs, and you've got mine sweepers. And a bit like the air superiority, you take one off the other counter, and if there's any surviving mine units available, then they can attack the surface line reserve box. Again, roll 1 dice per mine value, like a gunnery factor, and hit on a 1, and then roll to determine damage. Finally, you get to surface line, which I said you do this 1-to-1 on the gunnery, number of dice equal to the gunnery factor. Again, hits on a 1, or pairs of 2s. So pairs of 2s will give you a hit as well. And surface line, as I say, they can target surface reserve if there's an overlap. Finally, in surface reserve, not much happens here, but if there are convoys, enemy convoys available, surface reserve can attack them, just like as if you were in the convoy attacks box. But the main thing about surface reserve is if you end up with units in here, they get to go back on the board. If you're in the convoy attacks box, like, say, Raiders, who are trying to avoid combat, then they actually go home directly. They don't stay in the sea zone. So surface reserve is what actually gets you owning the area. And the result of these boxes tends to move the units in. So, for example, once there's a mine warfare has been done, you can move that mine unit into surface reserve or convoy attacks if you want to. Your choice. And pretty much the difference is, do you want it to count or not? But if they're in surface reserve, they're vulnerable to surface line, possibly. And a lot of those are like that. Land-based air also ends up in convoy attacks and not in surface reserve, so they don't get to control areas. So you go through each of the combats, getting to box 121. I forgot to say about the convoy. So in the convoy attacks, rather than look at gunnery factors or anything like that, all you look at for each non-submarine unit gets a dice roll against the convoy in the space. If you get a 1 to 3, you kill it. Submarines get 2 dice, and that's it. It's very simple. It's a very simple exercise on that. And what you will find is, certainly in this scenario, there will be lots of some raiders or submarines, etc., which are just attacking convoys, and there's no big battle other than the convoy attacks bit. So that it tends to be quite prevalent here. Right, once that's all complete, and the surface reserve units, every time they go back to the sea zone, you then analyse each sea zone and see if it's owned by one side or the other, as in they're exclusively got their units there, or there's both, or none. If there's both or none, then nobody gets the points. If one side has that area, then they get those points. A lot of these areas score 0 points for the Allies. Then you have to return all these ships back to their port boxes, so everything comes off the board again. There are, particularly in this scenario, there's a requirement for the Allies that every single base has to have 3 ships, 3 British ships, each British base, three British ships. I think I got that right. And for the French, it needs 1 ship in each, or there's a VP penalty. You then look at how many ships were sunk by each side, and you get a victory point for each of those. And then you also get a victory point for each convoy that was sunk on each side. After that, you're onto the next turn. Just one thing about rebasing is that you don't count the port box as a movement, so only to the adjacency area. So you kind of get a boost of 1 movement when you're coming back, so you can possibly rebase somewhere else. You don't have to go back to the same box, and in fact you probably won't remember where the hell it was anyway. You can go wherever you like, as long as it's within your range, or the last sea zone is by the port box is in your range. We got some stuff on the chat here. Sorry, I've been ignoring. Gareth, good to see you. Yeah, it was nice to meet you at PunchCon. Can't make this or Atlantic Chase. Well, I've done some Atlantic Chase on the channel in the past, so this will give you a little bit of an idea between the two. They really have, as a game, have nothing whatever to do with each other. They're completely different. Scott, you're opening for the Vassal mod. Yes, so am I. You don't relish punching all those counters. Yeah, I'll come on to that in a minute. Yeah, Scott's recommending Atlantic Chase. Yes. Yeah, I'd probably yeah, Atlantic Chase is a great game, but this has its own niche, I think, certainly. And Michael, yeah, it's not your cup of tea. No, that's fair enough, and it may not be. But I think it does hit a couple of sweet spots, which I'll cover. So right, yeah, it's just a VP game at that point. The next turn, you get your reinforcements, you put your convoys back on, and off you go again. So, big things to consider here. There's a lot of counters in this game. It's 1,400 counters. Most of them aren't markers. They are actually ships. If you imagine the US Navy and the Japanese Navy are huge. The Royal Navy is huge here, and this is probably the smallest scenario. And you can see the size of some stacks here with the French, British and German navies on the board only. And you've got the convoys as well. And when you're moving out of a port box, not everything in that port box is going to have the same range, or it's very unlikely to, or you wouldn't want that as well. So you are going to be moving individual counters. And then after the combat, you're going to move them back as well. So there's a lot of movement in the game. Most of the turn is actually getting the ships out onto the board and then putting them back again in the order that you'd like them to be. Now that may be an issue for people, in that do you get enough combat excitement so that all that movement is worth it? I think the combat system is very good. It's very simple to follow, but there is enough detail and there's enough variation on the types of units and what they can do to each other that I think it's very good. But the movement out is that's time consuming here, particularly on solo. If I say on solo, for you to do both sides, particularly later scenarios where you're doing both the US Navy, the Royal Navy, the Japanese Navy, and the Italian Navy. Never mind the German Navy, which does include the Vichy French as well. That's a lot of counters to go through. Getting out on the board and then putting them all back again into the port boxes. So where I think the sweet spot is here, probably not solo, is actually as a team game. I think this works very well as a regional team game on each side. So you're not putting out absolutely everything on the board. You do have, say, a US player, you have a Japanese player, you have a Royal Navy player, you have a Kriegsmarine and Vichy French Navy, and a few other bits and pieces. And you play it that way, and therefore you can focus in on those movements and the rebasing properly. I think, to be honest, when I was playing it solo, it was very hard not to kind of go, well, that stack is fine, I'll just keep it together and put it back in that port box, which is probably the wrong thing to do. So I think a team game, it would be great. I think the whole 25 turns, full campaign, it says in the rulebook it could take you a while, up to 50 hours. I don't doubt that, but I think the team play would probably make it better. In that you could do regional combat simultaneously, and you could do the movement simultaneously on each side, and many hands make light work. I think that'll speed things up and also keep that interest in. But I think solo is a bit of a struggle in the game. How do I go about storing the units? Well, I haven't yet, because this is the first time I played it. What I'm considering is splitting the turn one, or the turn that the particular nation enters. So for the Royal Navy, turn one. For example, for the Japanese, I think it's turn 8 or something like that. Putting those in a bag so that they all come out as one bunch, and then supplementary to that, have a counter tray which has the reinforcements on each turn, which you could mix those up, or possibly put an allied one, an Axis one, or you could mix them up on a particular turn, or multiple turns if there aren't that many coming through. I think that's the way I'd probably store it, but I haven't tried it yet. Mark, in the Ziploc bags by turn number, yeah. Yeah, I think as there's 25 turns, you may end up with a hell of a lot of bags. So I'm thinking maybe a dice tray might be good for the reinforcements, but I haven't done it yet. So yeah, I have gone on and clipped everything I've punched, but everything else that I haven't punched, which is basically anything that has a turn entry of greater than 3, is still in the sprues. But I consider that's what I'm doing. So I'd probably be well up for a team game of this. Particularly, I think that's where it probably sings. That would be my recommendation. But I think the combat system really works very well. This sort of mine layers, submarines, raiders, all this kind of variation of the units is really quite cool. Much better than the old War at Sea, Victory in the Pacific, which was basically a sort of line them up and blast them away, and that was kind of it. Eugenia, hello, good to see you. Right, so that's kind of all I wanted to say on the game itself. It's good production values. The counters I like. The only thing I don't like is the actual name of the unit. Is everything else is in bold, so it's readable, but the name, which is above the CA, you kind of have to focus on that. That was Dorsetshire. I know the my camera's just playing up. It just really doesn't want to focus. Those are a little hard to read, but they're particularly irrelevant. That you don't the counters are the counters. The important bits are the factors on the counter and the type of ship it is, rather than its name. So maybe that's not too much of an issue, but that's the only thing that's unreadable. Other than that, it's just a lot of counters, and normally in a war game, you'll have a front line or something like that, and you'll move counters up or down, or maybe bring on reinforcements. Here, you're taking everything on the board except for convoys, taking off the board, and then the next turn putting it back on, and then taking it all off, and then that motion there. I think you need to make sure that you're going to get sort of the bang for the buck in the combat phase, so that you don't kind of get disillusioned with the moving. Now people may like that moving. Yeah, I think it was all right, but as for a solo, for what is probably the smaller scenario, it was a bit of a slog at points to just go, oh right, let's rebase everything, especially where you had this victory point penalty if you didn't cover all the bases with 3 ships or 1 ship, depending on if you were British or French bases. That was kind of, again, with using the range and going, okay, that ship could get there, that could, it could, the ship that's here could get here, but that one couldn't, so therefore I'd have to take from here, that kind of thing. It's important for the victory points, but how much game is in there, I don't know. But again, I'll reiterate, the combat system is good fun, and lots of variation there. A lot of drama, I think, will be there as well. One thing I haven't told you, which you'll see that all of these ships all face up. Actually, when you place them, they go face down, with the exception of the convoys. So all you'll see actually is stacks of British flags, French flags, Kriegsmarine flags, Japanese flags, American flags, and that's it. You won't actually see the ships until you get to the battle, the combat mat, and then they're revealed in their boxes, and you fight things out. So I haven't experienced that bit either because I've been doing it solo. I think that's all I wanted to really say. Oh, one final thing. There are some neutrals here which you can bring in. You can bring the Turks, you can bring the Peruvians in, the Argentinians. They all have their own little navies. And how that works is that there's a kind of victory point poker which comes up, which essentially the Axis player can bid for them to come in for a number of victory points, and either the Allied player can go, yeah, go ahead, or they can say no, they don't come in, and then suffer the penalty on their side. So and you can only do it once for each of these neutrals. So there's some interesting variation there as well, but I haven't covered that yet because I didn't do any of that in this game. Yeah, Eugenia. Yeah, sorry, you arrived a bit late. Yes, it's functional. It needs to be that way because we need space in these sea zones. So the land space kind of really doesn't do anything in the game except for the map key and these boxes and the turn track here. The land isn't really involved, so it's all port boxes and sea zones, and those are the important bits. So the land has been squashed, and some of the sea areas have been increased, and it really is necessary. And I don't think it's that bad, really. I don't think I'm not put off by it, but other people may do. It's really ugly. Yeah, I don't know. I'm when you're playing it, you're looking at the sea zones. You're never looking at the land. You may look at the position of port boxes, but that's about it. The green areas are you kind of fade out of what you're focusing on because there's no point. Yeah, Marx is worth it if you actually have someone to play with. Yeah, I'm not sure the solo could be a little bit of a slog for you. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I've just been looking at the chat to see if there's anything else to say, but thanks very much for coming and having a look. If you have the game, try it out for yourselves. Look, Gareth, yeah, Black Sea looks a bit big. It needs to be because you've got 4 Z zones in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. So each of those need to have space for putting, a stack of ships on either side. Nerd, hello. Very hard with the game unless you have a very short-term memory. Well, that's the thing. One thing I thought about doing it solo with the Fog of War is that you could place your units on one side, flip them over, and then kind of walk away, have lunch, etc. Because I guarantee you won't remember every single ship or ship type that is in every sea zone. That'll go out your head very quickly. So when you come back, you'll actually surprise yourself. So the second player would put theirs in. You will then know what they have, but what the first side have, usually the Allied in this scenario, you will struggle to remember. So that's I think you can do that bit okay. Anyway, as I said before, if you've got the game, let me know in the comments of this video what you think of it. I thought it was worth just sending out my initial thoughts, because it sounds like it's getting into a kind of Marmite territory online. Some people sort of love it, some people hate it, kind of thing. So I wanted to just cover things on this channel. So just give you a bit of an insight, having actually got it out, clipped at least a lot of the counters, and played through a few turns, what I thought of it. Yeah, Scott, you said it does get congested in certain areas. I haven't really, as you can see, we got stacks here of about 10. Yeah, it's about 10 ships. You don't tend to get more than that, although who knows, on the American Japanese side that might have. Mark, you're actually running the campaign 3 turns in. You're enjoying it, okay? Yeah. So you've experienced this this big move, big shift every turn, and again, it's whether you get the bang for the buck out of the combat. It's quite possible you do, in which case you're just planning for the next turn and you accept it. But you're saying you're enjoying it, so good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say on it. So thanks anyway for joining the chat, giving your opinions of the game and the questions, etc. So it'll be 4 hours for those 3 turns. Yeah. I played it over a number of days, so I kept coming back to it. So I didn't really time it myself, but 4 hours sounds probably about right. And I think there would be considerable downtime, particularly for the Axis player on these first 3 turns, because the German Navy isn't that big. It's not even as big as the French Navy, never mind the Royal Navy. So I think it's quite a different time. I'm trying to think of the quite well. Sort of asynchronous kind of, yeah. It's heavily weighted for the playing time on the Allied side. Still, anyway, I'll be off. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope it's been helpful. And if you do pick up the game, or you have picked up the game, let us know in the comments how it's going on the video. I'll monitor that. But until then, Bleachwood is signing off, and I'll see you again on the channel soon. Bye for now.